Good morning, one and all everywhere, here now. We are together, a few of us, this morning again on the Sunday. It is March 19th, and started out talking a little bit about the concept of a decision and eligibility, and starting to look at what it is that goes on inside each of us that could be, I don't want to say that I tell the truth. I want to suggest that thinking about things openly is a chance to begin to consider the possibility of your own activity, of your own engagement, of your own instigation of any inner conflict and emotional turmoil. That starting to see it as something that we're each doing rather than something that we seem to see so clearly in what others are doing, which is somewhat of an indication that if we can think we see it clearly in others, we obviously are foggy about our own doing of those same things, or our own capacity to do those same things. We wouldn't be aware of them in such minute detail for everyone else if we didn't have some connection to them, or some drive to escape that connection, or think that we can. And so that's the mental obsession, is thinking about things that aren't true and making believe they're true, or thinking about things that are true and making believe they're false. It's a very simple shift of awareness. And if we're thinking about life in ways that life isn't, we are deciding on ideas that aren't true, and then maintaining those ideas, and that chronic maintenance of those impressions that we create become depressing in time, naturally. And if we're trying to escape the depression, while we continue to maintain the thing causing the depression, that's addiction. We're trying to feel better about what's wrong, trying to escape what's wrong, trying to get away from it while we keep maintaining it. Wherever we go, it goes with us, because it's being created by us. It's being created in thinking we're doing about what's happening, and thinking that thinking is so dominant, and thinking's on the throne of life, rather than simply seeing it as something we're doing, and seeing thoughts as thoughts, and seeing our ability to choose those thoughts as the culprit in how we use those thoughts and think of those thoughts. So if we're disturbed, you can always be assured something you're doing is causing the disturbance, because if it weren't in your own experience, nothing anybody else could do would even be noticeable to you. So we're here to talk a little bit. Here comes Nick. Morning, Nick. So, Gabe, to your point in terms of that inner conversation, my sense is that the eligibility, if I tell somebody something they're doing and think of it as something I'm not doing, I'm creating a conflict with them, because I can't not be doing it for me to notice it. I wouldn't notice it any more than I notice the colors I see if my eyes weren't capable of seeing those colors. I wouldn't notice the wrong things in others if I didn't have either the capacity or the current interaction with those things in that way I'm seeing. And my experience is it's always what I'm doing that I'm seeing in other people, and they're actually offering me perspective on what I'm thinking. And when I think I'm not thinking what I'm thinking, I want to say fuck you to them rather than thank you for the perspective. And it's a pretty fine line between the insanity and insanity. Ill mental health is a very easy thing to accomplish. Just like eating bad food is a very easy thing to get food poisoning. Very simple. To think that we shouldn't get the consequences that are caused by what we do is another line of thinking that's irrational and unreasonable and illogical and untrue. It's just inaccurate. And it causes this internal grind. So the eligibility part, like in the third tradition of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a desire to stop drinking is the only requirement. If I have a desire to stop this thinking, I have at least acknowledged that the thinking I'm doing is problematic. And it isn't the thinking that I'm doing, it's the obsessive thinking that I'm stimulating, just like it isn't drinking that's my problem. It's the obsessive compulsive drinking that turns into my problem. Same with drugs and alcohol and any other thing that I think I'm going to fill the void. And why would I need to fill the void if it weren't empty? And what would be emptiness within truth? It would be non-substantive, something that has no basis, something that doesn't exist other than in thought. Lies only exist in thought. They aren't floating around the universe. And if they are, and we can be free of them in our own thinking, then it reveals that there is no power in them whatsoever, but that which I give them by making believe they're true, by making believe they're real. Nothing more. As we talk about it openly, since we're always in the present, and often talk about what isn't happening as justification for not paying attention to what is happening, it gets easier to start doing this where we go, wherever we go, with everyone we go, and everything we interact with. It just shifts our perspective of how those excuses in those immoral stories we tell about why we shouldn't be where we are, don't feel that we're here in the present, don't have what we need, all that kind of stuff, basically reinforce these ideas of separation and disconnect and I'm apart from rather than a part of. And it's a natural consequence of this line of thinking. It's going to happen whenever we do that thing, just like a ball's going to bounce off a wall if you throw it at it.
I heard somebody talking about self-reflection. I like that term. It almost sounds not as scary as mental obsession. If you're telling somebody you want to go to a self-reflection meeting, what is the difference there? Where do you think this is about?
Do you know what the self is, Anthony?
Me.
Well, it's a reflection of your thought about your thinking.
Yeah.
So if you see that, self-reflection is actually ego. It's only a reflection of thought. When we think about thinking, that's thinking of itself, and we think the self we think about is who we are. It's not. It's just a thought. We're thinking about our thinking, and we're talking to our thinking, and we're calling it who we are. That's delusion. It's an illusion thought to be real, as though it's who we are. And now we're talking to it and arguing with it and fighting with it internally. It's exactly what the obsession is. We're trying to get that negotiation settled. We're trying to dominate it. We're trying to control it. Why are we trying to control it? Because it's out of control. And out of control in this case means there's absolutely no control in it because there's no power in it. There's no essence to it. None. Just a thought, thinking about a thought. And we think of thoughts as real and true. It's our reality, our truth, our world. We talk about it that way as though it's separate from everyone else's and then wonder why we feel alone. So my sense is self-reflection and all that kind of stuff is contemplation is very different than self-reflection because we're just contemplating what's happening. That's a meditative state of awareness. If I'm thinking about myself, I'm reinforcing there's a self to think about. If it's only an illusion and I've turned it into a delusion by thinking it's real, what is that but insanity to continue to do it? Literally insane. I'm seeing and hearing things that aren't happening and thinking that they're all that's happening. And all that I am, much, much less or more. Can't be. I can think it is. Well, it isn't. If I can think what's happening shouldn't be happening, think about that. If I can think what's happening shouldn't be happening while what's happening is happening, it's a pretty good indication I have the capacity to make believe that what I'm thinking isn't what I'm thinking. And as a result, the effects are not being caused by me. They're being caused by everything other than my experience. If I did not exist, those effects would not exist. My existence confirms the effects. Same with yours. And this one little thing we each have is the decision to identify with it as something we're doing or make believe, misidentify it as something happening to us. And the only thing I've ever seen people get sober over or actually be relieved of those compulsions is coming to terms with the fact that they are now owning the problem. They're admitting they're powerless over alcohol, for instance, is one example, because there's no power in the thought. None. It's been a lie the whole time. I could control it. And what did I do? Didn't control it. So I thought lack of control proved that I was in control. That whole wonky line of thinking starts to show up in the way that we use and misuse the drugs we take, or the alcohol we take, or any compulsion.
I noticed for me that I start to spiral a little bit. Like when I'll be thinking that everything's great, I'm happy with everything, and then I'll read about somebody that did something amazing, or somebody I know that's just so one in a million, and then I compare myself to that person. I'm like, God, what did I waste all my time doing? How did this person do so much?
But the whole basis of that self you think you are is based on a comparison of your thinking about your thinking. That's why the thinking goes on all the time. Thinking's always changing. It's never the same. Even if it were identical all the time, it would be in a different place at a different point in time. Always. We're always moving through space, always. Everything in its relation to everything else is always changing. So, yeah. Anthony, if your ideas about who you are is what you think, you're already in a comparison and contrasting, and you're already in that mode, thinking if you do it alone, you're better off. And you think you got it all sorted out until you hear another idea that doesn't align with yours. And all of a sudden you feel like you're spinning out, but you're noticing that you're actually spinning, that it's going around and around and around. That's a good word.
Yeah, I don't like the feeling.
Yeah. So you're seeing it because it's spinning, that vicious cycle of this thinking about thinking about thinking about thinking about thinking. What I need to do is have more thinking about my thinking now, and that'll fix it.
Yeah.
Rather than say, no, I'm just a dog chasing its tail. Even dogs that chase their tails, when they finally catch it, they let it go so they can continue to have so much fun. So it's just noticing your thoughts are thoughts. They're imagined, they're ideas, concepts, illusions. We attach narratives to them and begin to produce a complete play in our brain about them, and use words to try to substantiate them as things happening and real. I feel blocked. Well, when I feel blocked, I think there's a block. And what would the block be if it weren't a thought? If it was up to thinking? What would thinking think about but thinking? That's what thinking does. It's trying to analyze all the information coming from the senses, but what we talk about in terms of our senses is all based in thought, because they're all words. Words come from thoughts. What we say is an indication of what we're thinking. That's why in our conversation, looking at the words and saying, like you just said, spinning, we reveal in our words things that we don't think we're saying. And yet, if you look at the words a little closer, you begin to admit that you're actually witnessing very clearly what you're doing while you're thinking of it in other terms. Like you've given it another connotation as though it's a mask. You want to hide what's actually going on for the sake of what you think is going on. And I think, Anthony, during the week, I think we talked about the fact that it may have been somebody else, but it seemed to me it was you and I. If we can be, he was talking about creativity. And I said, think of how creative it is to make believe that all we are is what we think. And then make believe that it's actually who we are. And have our whole interior experience turn into emotional turmoil and inner conflict and depression. And not notice how creative we are. That's a huge effort, to deny life, to deny truth, to deny reality, to deny peace, to deny all the stable aspects of life itself in the name of creating and concocting a self we think we are, and then wonder why the struggle seems so hard, because the creativity in it is enormous. We've actually made believe what we created on a stage with actors becomes life itself, rather than an expression, a metaphor, some kind of an analogy, some sort of a chance to offer some perspective. The identification here is just simply noticing what we're doing. It doesn't identify us as a persona, except to the characteristics we begin to assimilate and assume as thinking are who we are, because they look like things that we would like to emulate and express because we saw them in other people and liked them, and started to think, well, that's a good thing to pose as being, and I'm going to add that to my armor. They're just choices. That persona is made up. Just like characteristics are just chosen. It doesn't mean we don't have some inherent traits in our DNA, but DNA is changing. May be slow, but it changes. And if the traits I make believe are true for me cause anxiety and stress because they're not actually true, they're just tendencies that I end up glomming onto as truth and reality and treat them as though they're not, I can't do anything about them. The stress from that is going to affect the DNA and pass that on to the next generation in some way. Even if it's not even my children coming from my DNA, it's affecting the population of people who are having babies by adding stress to that population. And that stress will end up reflecting, because there's no division between us. We're affecting everything all the time, each of us. And that may seem grandiose, but it isn't grandiose if it's accurate. So eligibility, just like a desire to stop drinking in terms of this conversation, is starting to notice that it may be, possibly, perhaps, something we're doing to cause the experience. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to agree with it, have faith in it, hope for it. None of it. But if you simply consider the possibility and begin to consider it, you will begin to see things in a different way than if you say, absolutely not, I have nothing to do with it. That's bullshit. What are you talking about? Don't tell me what to think. All those kind of reactive things. If you notice what's happening from a perspective of imagining that you may have something to do with it, you'll begin to complement your own awareness of those things you're noticing, because you'll start seeing that you can't be your thoughts if you're watching your thoughts. At least it will increase that awareness. You already know that because you've always been watching your thoughts. You've been sick of what you've been watching and haven't wanted to turn the TV off, which is the addiction. You think somehow keeping it on, you're going to get it right. You're going to get it. You're going to control it someday. It's going to happen one day. If I just force more of that self I think I am on it by thinking more about myself. Morning, S.
Good morning.
So we've been talking a little bit about eligibility for the discussion in terms of beginning to concede our own involvement in what's happening rather than seeing it as something happening to us, and starting to notice the root of cause. If we're witnessing an effect, we're part of the cause. Doesn't mean everyone else isn't involved. It simply means that the one thing we can choose to do, which is the one thing we can choose to think about, is how we think about what's happening.
The responsibility thing.
Yeah. Well, and the word responsibility, interesting, is able to respond, responsibility. And reaction, when it comes to the basic definition of addiction within alcoholism, and it's interesting that addiction was considered, with alcoholism, considered to be an allergy of the body that led to a craving and an obsession of the mind. What's interesting is every one of the other compulsions seem to create the same allergy with the same craving. And within thinking, the craving, the allergy is to a lie. We have an abnormal reaction. Abnormal response to anything is a reaction, meaning it's just a predisposed defense mechanism to try to protect against the thing we're doing, while in fact, we're the ones doing it. This is like trying to buy a fire suit because you keep lighting yourself on fire. And rather than notice it's the lighting the fire that's the problem, you think of it as the effect, and you need to get a fire suit to protect yourself from what you're doing, as though there's no way to stop.
The jaywalker.
Yeah. And to that point, the jaywalker in that story of constantly jaywalking, getting hit by his car, is addicted to the adrenaline rush of the excitement of the experience. See that all over the place. People drive risky. They do things that are daring. They subject themselves to situations that drive their adrenaline and all of their inner emergency drugs, use up drugs for things that are self-imposed and created when a body needs them for when they really have an emergency rather than these induced emergencies. So we tap into our own ability to produce chemicals in our own body and don't realize that if we were at peace more and at ease more, the body would start developing. I suspect humans haven't even realized the capacity of the body to resolve issues on its own as a healing mechanism, to produce drugs that would give us the sense of well-being we constantly seek, and trying to come up with a concoction of tailor-made pharmaceutical, like we become a pharmacist. We're our own druggist. When in fact, our bodies are perfectly capable of generating, probably, it's about as far as I can tell, it's about the best, and most physiologists and neurologists, it's about the best chemical factory known so far in our own brain, in our own bodies. And we're abusing it, turning it into an acidic, corrosive, cannibalistic inner problem, literally devouring our organs and vascular system and all the other natural components that we have in the name of trying to save ourselves while we're killing ourselves. And that would, again, be an indication of addiction. The thing we do to save ourselves is actually the thing that's killing us. And it's that alone reveals this natural lie, this idea that the result, we can get over the problem by fixing the result rather than noticing it's what we're starting in the thinking that's causing the result or the effect. So S, there was something you sent me last week.
Yes.
Karl Ove, was that it, or was it something else?
Well, I did send you just a photo of the cover of My Struggle, but that was I think just to remind both of us the book I was trying to talk. I was trying to recall the name of that author in something we talked about last week.
Yeah, it seemed to be it was hitting on these points.
Yeah, absolutely.
The decisions we make, the choices, etc.
Mm.
And Gabe was pointing out, is it Hitchens?
Yeah, Hitchens.
Yeah, Christopher Hitchens.
He was and something that had never occurred to me, even though we talk about the fact that the absolute reveals itself in all things, because things that seem separate only seem separate to the focus we give them, when in fact always have a consequential essence that reveals that they're whole. Like the idea that everything changing doesn't change. The absolute's revealed when you see it all. When you think of it all, you all of a sudden see it in absolute terms. When you think of it in parts and pieces, it seems to be only relative. And yet the two are happening simultaneously. So the idea that Gabe mentioned earlier was that Hitchens suggested that free will, if free will is free will, then we don't have a choice. And I didn't, I'd never really thought of that, except I thought of it in relation to
more.
love. I thought of it in relation to love, because if you're condemned to love, let's say you're condemned, if you're condemned to sanity, there's no limit to the benefit of that, right? And the only real condemnation when we're condemned to something is the idea that we're limited, that our movement is limited, that our capacity is limited, that our choices are limited. So in the same point, Gabe, if free will is not a choice, it's because it's absolute. And there are no choices in the absolute. They're just states of being. They're like responsibility is a principle. Principles aren't negotiable. They're simply principles. They stay the same regardless of what we think of them. And Shakespeare talked about, in that 116 sonnet where he said, love is an ever fixed mark. When altereth we find, it does not alter, meaning it does not change when we think it changes. It stays the same, which is a revelation of this absolute essence. So I would think, Gabe, that he's referring to that, and I'm sure, given his intelligence, may recognize that, but it also may be quickly lost in thinking about it, to think of it as something that we're condemned to and not notice that to be condemned to principles in life is ultimately, it's just a word being used to indicate something that we absolutely have and can't talk our way out of, and can't think our way out of, and can't oppose. Other than the opposition occurs in our thinking, not in reality and truth, not in life. And ultimately, that identification begins to actually help reveal the insanity of the thinking, because the conflicts and the results of insanity are always the exact opposite. The promise of insanity is a broken promise. So the promise is always to get exactly what you thought wouldn't happen. The promise is great things, the result is pitiful things. Until they're seen as being natural consequences of that line of thinking. And once you see that, it's very easy to say, wow, that would make no sense to do, because you recovered literally awareness. Rather than make believe it's your only choice, the only thing you can do. Addiction nobody seems to be addicted to love in any other way than a terminology that isn't love. It's possession and control and allegiance and submission and all those kinds of other things that are contractual arrangements, not the freedom of noticing that if love is love, that's the state of our absolute being. And we all share that, always have, always will, no matter what we think. It's just that's a state of being, because it's not a negotiable, optional thing.
We'll talk about, Jack, the imposement.
What's that?
You mentioned the word imposed.
Imposed? Yeah. Well, think of the parts of that word, imp and posed. An imp is a mischievous creature, and posing is a mask. So impositions of weight, if we impose an idea that isn't true and it has weight to it, it's obviously the thought we're maintaining that creates that. And what would the thought come from? Pressure. What would that imposition come from? That position we're taking in relation to something, as though that thing is real from the point of view we're claiming it's real, rather than saying this is just a point of view, we're taking it as being reality and truth. And so it creates weight, because it creates pressure, because we're pushing up against nothing, thinking it's everything, thinking it's something. And to mention that nothingness is interesting, because I used to think, well, the idea is true and I'm fighting the idea. Well, the idea isn't true, so basically it has no basis. So I'm really only struggling with the idea I'm having right now about the other thought as being true to even be something I can oppose. So my fight with it is my attempt to confirm it's real, when in fact there's nothing there but my fight. And to Anthony's point earlier, that spinning sense is this recirculation of that thought over and over and over and over and over again, hoping, praying, wishing, faith that someday it's going to be true. Someday, if I just keep focusing on it harder, I'm going to make this true. And what happens is the experience gets harder, the imposition turns to depression, because the longer I chronically maintain something that imposes a weight on me, the heavier it gets, and eventually it turns into depression. It's just a natural byproduct. And we feel it, we know it, we recognize it, and yet talk about it in ways that want to affect change, but want to change the effect rather than see the effect as a natural consequence of a cause that is insane. It's not right. Acting is right. It's never going to be right if it's wrong.
So as to Anthony's point about thinking of other people and comparing, and
Yes.
and since we're talking about step 3, I just found a couple tidbits. Whatever our protestations are, not most of us concerned about ourselves, our own resentments, our own self-pity, and that alcoholics are an extreme example of self-well-run riot. And then above everything else, we have to get rid of this selfishness. God is the only thing that makes this possible. We have to have his help. First of all, we have to stop playing God ourselves. We have to recognize and be aware that he is the principal. We are his agents. He is the Father, and we are his children. And I think it's a very difficult thing. I mean, we can say it as much as we want, that we're not thinking about ourselves and the outcome and that feeling that something's going to be better. But in doing that, we either become more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Like I can see where that happens. And particularly in the business I was in for so many years, to try to manipulate people into doing things my way or using me for their deals and stuff. And if I didn't get my way, I'd be angry or indignant or self-pitying. But if I just know that the truth of who I am and who all of us are is in fact love, it saves me so much dialogue inside my own head. I don't have to do it anymore. I never thought that your one saying I'm up to something would be like the force of my peace. I mean, I can actually do that now today when my self-will starts to run riot and something isn't happening the way I think it should happen. I mean, I'm in a spot where I can just drop to my knees at any time and say, I need your help and I'm up to something. And I kind of just let it stop there. I just stop that wrestle and I stop. I have a very unquiet mind. So I just stop. I just take that pause and I hang out and I go, all of that is just an illusion. And whatever happens next can be okay. It's all going to be okay. And it's an amazing place to be. I'm not a victim of my delusions anymore. I can't, wrest satisfaction and happiness out of the world if I manage it properly. I can just be. I can just let it go and know that everything's going to be okay. And it's amazing. And thank you for that, Jack. You gave me that.
Well, I would say you've always been And it isn't something, again, if this is something that we can't talk our way in and out of, it's only the talking that we're doing to the self we think we are that we're struggling with.
Correct.
So that beingness, it isn't about what happens next, it's about what's happening now. And my sense is if God is infinite, if that power we talk about is infinite, and God is a name, even in the book, it says we just use this name to define something that we have become aware of, that we've woken up to. It's always been there, and everything we've ever needed has always been where we are, because it can't give us some things only when we ask for them, or the asking would be the control. The asking would be more powerful than the things. The asking would mean that I don't have them, when all I'm doing, and what Bill's pointing out in the big book, he's talking to people who have been so self-centered, they think all they are is what they think. He's talking to the newcomer. And he's also talking to everyone who has ever gotten sober, that can go to the extreme other end of starting to see that the absolute is absolute, regardless of what we think. But those ideas of what's next, I don't have to do if what's happening now is an illusion, but it's disturbing. It's because I think it's true that I'm creating the disturbance I think I need to be better than in the next moment, rather than concede. It has no impact whatsoever when I'm not fighting what I'm doing on my experience. When I begin to notice that my disturbance is, in fact, an accurate assessment of something I'm doing that's disturbing, to that point about I'm up to something, I begin to see and remember that I'm not the things I'm thinking. I have an essence that knows better, or I wouldn't notice the disturbance. Wouldn't be there. I would just simply have a relationship to it and say, oh, I'm thinking something that's disturbing. There's no conflict in that. There's no fight in that. There's no perpetuation of it. There's no greater impression, Gabe. There's no fight to maintain this idea that I shouldn't be doing it and can't be doing it and wouldn't be doing it if it weren't for this, that, and them. And I always keep doing, rather than just say, I'm doing it. Whatever it is causing the condition that I'm witnessing in my thinking is what I'm doing in my thinking. And just sum it up in the simplest terms possible.
And I can recognize and be aware of the lack of truth in what I'm thinking. Like, I know when I'm bullshitting myself, like when I'm thinking the wrong thoughts, and I like it because it conjures up those chemicals in my body, that high, like, that false illusion of this is so cool. And I need to share it with somebody because it's so much fun. And then I can go, no, I'm up to something. This is an illusion.
I'll give you a tip though. None of the thoughts that we come up with on our own are true. None of them.
I believe that wholeheartedly.
The truth is the awareness that it isn't thinking that is true. Thinking is a byproduct of truth. We can express truth, but when we do, it's kind of like real fear. When you're facing something that's really scary, you know what to do. You don't do a lot of thinking about whether you want to run from the bear. There's not a lot of, you know what, I wonder, I think that I can hang around here a little longer and things will be fine. And I wonder, so-and-so said this, and maybe I should consider that. And there's none of that going on. You just act. Your feet are 2 feet ahead of your head. They're working, they're running. Point being, that clarity as an expression of truth that's what intuition is. It's knowledge beyond reason. So that does not include thinking. It does not include understanding. It does not include reason or logic. It's knowledge of knowledge. When we express it, our thoughts are now able to do what they're designed to do. They're a channel for that knowledge, not a channel to try to pretend that we are that knowledge in our own thinking. And even to suggest,
we're not God.
Well, we may well be a perfect expression of that power.
Sure.
And not act like it and not think like it because of it. And thinking is an action. Thinking is a primary action that leads to all voluntary actions, always. Anything we choose to do is based on a thought, always. And we want to do those things or we would not choose them. The problem is we want them when we think they're real because we think the thing that's going to come from them is the only possibility. And that again shows how our expectations are laden with this idea that the world should only go as I think it should, because I think the thinking is so true, because I know thinking is permanent. I know reality and truth are permanent essence. I know it because if I'm made of it, I must know that. So I immediately make believe that my thinking should be the exact same thing when I think about something I want, and all I should ever get is what I originally thought I wanted when I had the original thought. And I'm in hell when it doesn't go that way. When all it is my allegiance to the thought I had about it, rather than when I make a decision, say, I'm making this decision, this is the expectation of it, but I'm going to watch what happens in relation to it and start to see that that greater thing happening is actually a better indication of what I'm thinking at a greater level than the immediacy of my thinking, and actually reveals the underlying intention I have. And if the intention I have is actually aligned, because it's not a thinking thing, it's just a being thing, then I'm going to get information from that process that's going to enlighten me as to what I'm thinking and how I'm operating, that's going to offer me perspective to begin to disband and let go of the ideas I have that I think are true and real, and notice that apparently they're not, if I'm not getting what I thought I wanted. It just starts to help dissolve this perpetuation of chronic thinking and focus, as though my attention, paying more of my attention and thought to something that's already wrong, is going to somehow make it right. So noticing it's all illusion. It's all just ideas, thoughts, contemplative shadows or illusions that cause shadows. Think of shadows of doubt. We talk about that. We talk openly about that. Those are shadows caused by the doubt of what we're doing. We know if we're living with doubt, something's doubtful in our thinking. And now not to admit that sets off this whole tirade again of trying to overcome it, trying to fix it, trying to get better at it, trying to think that the next thing I do is important, rather than notice it's the thing I'm doing that's causing the idea that I want something somewhere else other than here, when here is the only place, the only now, the only ever I'm ever in.
So how do you navigate someone that you have a sincere, you have a sincere and pure hope for them? You think nothing but pure and happy and clean thoughts, and then all of a sudden they doubt you. You just rest in that and let things unfold as they unfold, because I never want to have to defend myself.
Well, even in your supposition that you're thinking of them in those ways, and since you're thinking in those ways, they should trust those ways, is all born in thinking. If they are those things you're thinking about them being, pure, for instance, honest, for instance, true, for instance, real, for instance, you're actually giving them what they are, rather than thinking about them as you think they are. If the nature of existence is already those things, then that's everyone's essence, everybody's and everything. Think how perfectly, this goes back to Anthony's thing, think how perfectly everything in the universe operates. It does exactly what it's designed to do at the molecular structure. There doesn't seem to be any thinking involved at all. It's just a sense of knowing. It's a knowing of knowing. So those things function perfectly, and we struggle with perfection because we know that we could do better than we do when we're acting dysfunctionally. We're aware of it. It isn't, everything compared to itself is perfect. We kind of miss that point in the seeking of perfection. We're forgetting that we're simply comparing something that is happening as it is happening to something that isn't happening as it isn't happening, and thinking that because someone else does something else, that should be what we're doing here, while what we're doing is what we're doing. That's the problem with comparison. It isn't comparison, it's making believe that something else should be happening presently, when in fact what's happening, if it's looked at as what's happening, it's perfect. There's nothing about it that's wrong. It's the idea I have of fighting it, the idea I have of changing it, the idea I have that it shouldn't be happening while it's happening. Think of that. While something's happening, I think it shouldn't be happening. Where is the source of the problem with that? Not what's happening, but what I'm thinking, period. That tends to consume my day when I'm thinking about things I want and wished and hoped would go the way I thought they would, and people are not cooperating. It's very easy to be consumed by that stuff.
Well, it's hard not to defend oneself.
Yes, but this isn't about not defending. Somebody's attacking you. We're designed to defend ourselves. We're naturally built to fight and run and do whatever it takes, freeze, fawn, whatever the instinctual natures are. We're designed to survive those sorts of things. So part of it also that I've learned is that it's not about accepting what somebody's doing. It's accepting the unacceptability of it and starting to say, look, I'm not interested in dealing with people that lie and cheat and steal. I'm not interested in telling them, oh, you're great, you're wonderful, just keep doing everything you're doing and you'll be better. I'm actually sentencing them to death because they're going to have the impression that they're better off and they're winning the war and they've gotten another vote in favor of their own inner conflict and their own dementia and their own devastating interaction to give them the impression that they've constantly need to steal and lie to get by, to survive. That's desperation. That's fear. If I'm not honest with those people and say, look, I do not happen to be interested or appreciate engaging on a level that things are said and not done.
Can I quote you? That was perfectly worded.
Well, the difference is what I found was I've never been honest with people for the most part in my life. What I've done is gotten angry and pissed off and pushed them away and name them things that I do in the name simply because they didn't do what they said they were going to do. All of a sudden, they're the enemy, they're the idiot. And listen, I don't think those words are misused, but it doesn't mean my relationship to it can't be broader and larger and a little more insightful than simply limiting it to the knee-jerk reactivity. That reactivity, in my experience, if you think of the word, it's reaction. It's a constant replication of this defensive posture built into thinking anything that goes beyond the limits of my expectations or my thoughts is an attack by somebody else, rather than it's defining my limits in my thinking. It's not defining an attack. I'm only seeing it as an attack so I can blame the thing attacking, just like I do when I used to say it's my brain, my thoughts, my ego attacking me. They don't even have a life to do that. I have to think they're real and true to even conceive of that. And as I start conceiving of that more honestly, I start realizing that as I can take it apart in my own head, I can take it apart in the conversations I have with people and just clearly say to them, I am much more interested in productivity rather than scarcity. That seems to be the goal here and seemed to be what the agreement we made was. And if that agreement's broken, it could be fixed by maintaining the agreement, going back. That can all be forgiven because it's already passed. It's already happened. But it's very difficult.
I feel like there was a sense of sincerity, and the agreement was that there was a sense of trust.
Yes.
And that it had been trusting and loving and open and free. And then I got questioned, like it needed to be reworded. And that was because of someone else's fear, not because of my lack of sincerity or my lack of, I had been steadfast in our agreement.
But you don't need to be steadfast at all for them to be true and whole. That's the problem, Jana. Has nothing to do with your thinking because they're already those things. If you didn't exist, they would still be those things.
Fearful?
No. Whole, pure, all those things that you thought you were imbuing them with.
Right.
You're not imbuing them with. They're already imbued with those things.
Right.
When you align,
question, I was being unimbued. I was being questioned because of someone else's fear, and I didn't want to defend it.
You were causing that. I was just going to say that I have a tendency of getting involved with people who are untrustworthy. And then I put trust within them because I think I'm going to save them. This is enabling. I think I'm going to help them and I'm going to give them what they're unwilling to do. And then they backfire on me and I again blame them for what I started.
The enabling?
Yeah. I mean, that's enabling. The idea that you're thinking about them qualifies them when who they are has never been in contest. It's never been in question. It doesn't mean we can't question it and we can't think it is in question. But when we do, it's our thinking that's causing the issues that we see. And I would say the fear that they were expressing is their awareness that they aren't trustworthy. Their reactiveness is almost admitting to you, I know better than what you're saying because I've failed so many times. But now what they're doing is blaming you for it rather than seeing it as something they're doing, which is, again, this natural tendency of the addiction to make sure that everybody but us is wrong.
Yeah, I see that now. I can see that. Okay, that I'm aware that my awareness is more open now. Thank you for the clarity. I get that.
Well, and your conversation with people will change. In my experience, I started to actually get honest and they say, look, there is enough wrong than to want to be involved in more. There's enough struggles. And I know that most of them are mine. But when I engage with somebody on this level, I do not feel it's a service to be quiet about my own experience of what's happened. So I'm going to tell you what I think. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to own it. You don't have to trust it. Nothing. But I'm going to mention to you what I think. Because operating that way is destructive. It basically creates reactivity. It spreads fear. It's all the anxiety that we do for everyone else. And what I realize is I'm at the center of all that stuff. If I have anything to do with it, I'm causing it all to some degree. It may not be as perceptible as the immediacy of people close to me, but if there's a ripple effect in the ocean and we end up with the waves from that ripple 10,000 miles away, there are waves of energy going out from our own experience that are affecting people at the other end. Tsunamis at the other end get built, like the butterfly flapping its wing causing the hurricane. I don't know that that's true, but I imagine the interactive potential of air when it's stimulated has an effect on everything.
Yeah, it's the sense of proportion thing again, too.
Yes, exactly. Very good. And that's exactly what Bill said. How can we take such a trivial idea and superimpose it as being reality in all respects? And we end up acting on the trivial idea while we have very good sense and reason, which shows that sense and reason is not reliable as a source because it isn't the source.
I must admit, my first thought on being questioned, I wasn't very reactive. I almost laughed. I almost laughed inside myself, and I was happy for that. And I wasn't as disturbed as I would have been previously. I felt like it was kind of out of left field. It was unexpected, but I wasn't super reactive. My first thought was kind of a little bit of a laugh, like, well, this is just fucking stupid.
Well, but consider the consequences, the reactions, the circumstances as absolutely correct for what you're doing.
Yeah.
They're actually mirrors, and we tend to think of them in relation only to what we thought we expected. And, well, this happened and it's stupid. But in fact, it's incredible wisdom because circumstances are actually consequences. They are the reflection of what we are doing, and they're perfectly reflecting what's actually happening rather than what we think is happening. So if we have a greater awareness and start noticing that the broader implications of what is actually happening is in fact very much a reflection of what we're thinking. If we're thinking in any way that's sick, but we wouldn't be struggling if we weren't thinking in sick ways. We would simply be witnessing and observing things that are happening as what's happening, and there would not be much meaning or significance to any of it. It would just be happening. It would just be the bounty of everything seen simultaneously rather than the narrow focus of something happening with one person in one way that we seem to be struggling with. It would just be a much broader awareness because that knowing awareness knows it all. It's connected to it all. It's not some small thing. It's absolutely absolute in every respect.
My want to manipulate and to defend and to change the reality of what is so much lessened.
Yeah. Well, as it is, though, it's kind of like having less dirty glasses. You start seeing better.
A new pair of glasses, Chucky.
Yeah. but you start seeing better. And
Yeah.
then you'll notice the subtleties of the things that you've been doing that have been so chronic, you thought they were your nature, when in fact they've been unnatural and abnormal and defective and diseased for as long as you've been doing them.
I kind of miss the drama inside my head. Like I feel like I should be upset, or I should be crying, or I should be defending, or I should be disappointed in the lack of trust in me. And none of that's happening. I'm kind of just that neutral thing's happening. I'm kind of like, wow, okay, well, that's about them, not about me.
Well, I would say neutrality is about you seeing it's about you and them, and none of us are separate from any of it. And it becomes a much more compassionate appearance because we're not thinking about it as, like somebody said to me recently, my side of the street's clean. And I said, well, if the other side isn't, you're still living on a dirty street.
Yeah, there is that. We're all connected. I get that, but I'm not playing into someone else. Well, there isn't someone else. We're all together in this whole thing, but I'm not accelerating. I'm not up to something.
Well, you're up to less. And if there's still a little something going on, you're going to notice a disturbance and all that. And that interactive web isn't something we're going to step away from simply because this isn't like not drinking anymore. And every day you haven't drank. We're going to be thinking all day long. It's kind of like food. You're addicted to food. It's a very different experience in terms of how you deal with moderating food.
Sure.
Compared to drinking, where we know every day we've succeeded, we haven't had a drink. It's a beautiful convenience to be able to say, yes, I'm sober today, another day. But when it comes to food, where's the line? When it comes to thinking, where's the line? I would say the line is when we start feeling that things are happening to us in any way, or that we're apart from anything in any way. If we start thinking of things unprincipled, we're not going to think of them as cohesive and as intimately bound in a way that being bound doesn't bind anything because there's no limit to it. It's an awareness. My sense is the tears turn from self-pity. Think of self-pity as basically imagining who we are as a pitiful self. Of course we're crying. We're sad. We're sad to think those things. But awe on the other end of that, as your awareness starts to become more obvious, is to start actually crying just over the awe of it all and the absolute magnificence and the capacity to be in the face of things that could often be disturbing. And notice they're just things happening as they're happening. They'd always been happening as they're happening. And it's what I was making of them, thinking of them, forcing on them that I was struggling with. That's the addiction. It isn't to suggest God comes and goes, gives and takes. None of those things would be true if God is infinite. We've already had it all the whole time. When we're praying beyond those limits, we're starting to think that the limits of our thinking obviously have something beyond them. And all of a sudden, we have a much different experience of what's available because we're no longer defending against the limited ideas that we're maintaining. Excuse me.
Yeah, the letting go of the defense is just huge.
Well, don't worry about letting it go. Notice when you're doing it, you're defending against something that isn't true. Austin, good morning.
We're no longer defending against our limited thinking.
Well, what happens when you concede something as it is there isn't any fight, so there's no offense or defense. Nobody who's ever offended is offended because they're not defensive. The only reason people are offended is because somebody's getting close to what they're defending that they think is right. It's very simple. So the defense won't go away. And the point of this is not to suggest that within thinking we should stop doing something.
Right.
It's starting to say that we're capable of doing everything. And there's the freedom. The neutrality is saying, I can pick up a drink, but when I have that freedom to notice that, I also know exactly what's going to happen if I do that. I have a premonition rather than a delusional idea that it's never going to have the consequence that it used to because I've been sober 35 years and certainly now would prove that I can do it. Well, I tried that thousands of times. Didn't work. I'm fairly convinced it wouldn't work. I don't need to be proven in that regard to be sane enough to simply say, I'm just not going to do that today. Maybe tomorrow that will work. I'm not going to do it today. Right now is the point at which I make decisions that cause the anxious disorders that I'm struggling with right now, always. That's the ownership and that's the identity. It's the beginning of seeing that it's our immediate present, which is always immediate and always where we've been. And I can talk about these things and you will think of them in terms of how you think about them and think that they're negotiable until you start considering that the absolute is not negotiable at all. It's not an option. It's just a state of being. Like a fish being in water does not think it needs to understand the chemistry complexity of water before it can swim. It just wags its tail and moves around. Knows what to do. We are in that same state. We are of that same state. It's the natural essence of our being nature, which has preceded our human experience because it's not in time. It's not time and space are limited to what we call the fourth dimension, but the dimensions have been created by humans. They're not divided in the universe. They're not divisible. They're absolutely intimately connected with all the other dimensions, which must mean everything that's happening is here now. And it just happens to be here now because our bodies are here now. Our human experience is amplified in terms of our capacity to begin to consider things honestly about our basic nature. And nature is basic because it's fundamental. It's not optional. It's not negotiable. So conceding that is a bit of a trick because it undermines everything I ever thought about who I am and what I thought about who people are and what they are and where they should be and what should be and what I like and what I don't. All that stuff becomes, all of a sudden, it just becomes a function of choice. Something I wanted to do at some point, made believe was the only thing I could do at some other point. Doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean it's real. And I would suggest when it comes to thinking, like I said earlier, if you want to make sure that you're clear about thinking, rather than try to figure out when you're wrong, just consider that anything you're thinking about that you think is limited to your thinking isn't right. It can't be right because it's not going to be inclusive of everything that is right. So it can't ultimately be true since truth includes everything, everywhere, and everything that we would even think doesn't even exist would be included in that. So it makes it easier. So what I began to notice is that I'm wrong most of the day, and occasionally I have little farts of insight where I just simply know what to do and don't think about it and have a greater sense of clarity in my thinking. It's not that I don't have that greater sense of clarity all the time. I'm starting to express it because I'm taking the pressure off my thinking to be the end all be all of all things and starting to allow it to channel that awareness and start doing things. And the familiarity with that becomes immediate because it's always been there. And I've simply been denying it by this other preoccupation of constantly thinking about my thinking and trying to get it right rather than notice that right's already right. It's already in perfect order. So if we share that here, our discussion is about talking about that here openly as a practice so we can take it to the street when we leave and let it become part of where our feet go, where we go, and the ability to speak to people honestly, not to sell them on anything, not to tell them the truth, but start interacting on a level that includes an awareness of them being whole and them being just fine.
I have sober feet. I have sober feet.
Yeah, seeing the people as well begins to help any of us see them struggling with the same things we're struggling with and think of what the message of AA is about. We are uniquely qualified to carry that message because we had the same experience with alcohol. This is the same experience with life we're talking about. And the qualification to talk about it is not selling it, not convincing somebody of it, not hoping that they'll believe you or trust you or any of it, but simply sharing it honestly and saying, in my experience, my thoughts, here's what I've witnessed. And if I can do any of that in an honest way, people are going to respond in ways where they say thank you because there's an appreciable benefit to it, rather than tell them what they should be doing, could be doing, would be doing if it weren't for this, that, or the other that they're doing.
Jack, I have a question.
Uh-oh.
So I went to a meeting that's not open anymore in Midtown Manhattan, and they had a baseball bat that was Bill's personal, what they called his peacekeeper during meetings, because sometimes he would have to bat some drunks who were being like disorderly into their seat. So I wonder about this idea we have of the literature versus the person, or the artist versus the person, you know.
Do you mean when things go wrong, should we pretend they're not?
That's kind of what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that back in the, we don't have cross-talkings in meetings, most meetings, right?
Allegedly.
That's right. That's not an AA principle. That's not an AA tradition. That's a culture that's been developed that came largely out of therapy. So in the early days, if people were talking shit, they'd say, sit down and shut your mouth and listen. They would tell people why, because that was a more honest approach to confronting somebody than patting them on the back and telling them they'll be great if they just keep coming back. But if they just keep coming back and doing the things that aren't great, we're helping them get worse by doing that. Honesty can feel brutal to the person listening because of the brutality they're suffering from the ideas that are being confronted in the honesty. It isn't an assault to tell somebody what you see honestly, especially if what I've learned is that people are so prone to reacting, and I'm one of them, that if I don't preface what I'm going to say by simply saying, this is a thought, I'm going to share a thought with you, this is the thought I'm having, I'm going to tell you what I'm thinking, this is what I'm thinking, it isn't about you, it isn't about your persona, this isn't an attack, I got to go about 6 sentences before I actually just say, this is something I'm seeing and sensing. And then when I do, people seem to have a little more room to say, oh, that's your viewpoint, that's your perspective. Yes, I say, yes, exactly. So if there's a possibility that you and I share anything when we're talking and I see something, I'd rather be able to say it to you and be wrong than keep quiet and pretend it's not happening, because it gives us the chance for you to actually look and say, well, some of that is happening, but here's the way I see it. And now we can start talking about the things we're thinking about honestly, without having it feel like something we need to resist and fight and completely collapse under the weight of the discussion or hate somebody as a result of it. Very different thing. So from what I understand, Herb K., who at the bottom of our weekly announcement has written an essay on when did the meetings become the program, because the meetings aren't the program. And a lot of people go to meetings. They have a ritual that they do to stay sober, but that's not the program. The program is about practicing principles in all our affairs and recognizing what principles are, that these are not negotiable. They're not optional. And we're practicing them when we begin to allow them to proceed. Principles before personalities means the reliance of life is principle. And if I put my personality in front of that, I'm putting what I think about myself in advance of that. And to any degree I do that, I'm going to cause conflict, and I'm going to cause sadness, I'm going to cause grief, I'm going to cause disharmony. Now, it doesn't mean when I'm honest that I'm not going to witness those same things, because very often in the openness of an honest conversation, somebody starts actually experiencing the dissatisfaction and the grief and the mourning that they've been suffering, that is now being given a little bit of space to start to be expressed.
So, Jack, do you agree with this illusion I'm about to make that, in acting, it's like an acting coach is shitty if you as the actor do not improve in that class? So if you're going to meetings all the time, et cetera, and, your life is not getting better and you're not living in the promises and all this stuff, is it a shitty program?
If it's the one you call yours, I'd say yes. But it's not unlike us to do shitty things. We talk about shit a lot, and it might be worth mentioning that shit is a waste product. It's something that all of the food and all the nutrients and all the fiber and all the sugars and all the carbs, everything has been taken out of it, the proteins, the enzymes, everything. And shit is basically the waste product of that. We talk about shit openly And I would suggest, again, that's another definition of a word that we're admitting is wasteful. We're wasting time, we're wasting this, we're wasting that in ideas that aren't true, which are shitty. There's nothing to them. There's no benefit to them anymore. Everything's been taken out of them. There's no substance. So
What? I was gonna say, I mentioned this because I went to Perry Street, which is like a really famous meeting in Manhattan.
the
And
little one downstairs, right?
yeah. And there was a woman there who was sober 36 years from Canada. And she qualified or led, I think as you guys say in California. And it was almost like too good of a qualification. It was like amazing. And it had not like, it wasn't like a therapy. It wasn't like a drunkalog. It was just like, she shared a little of her story, then go into meetings, then her program, and then what her life is like now. And everyone in the meeting was sharing like that they were like confused because she wasn't just talking about herself for like 20 minutes. And, you know, I guess my point with this is like, I find it very seldom that I hear people with a lot of time that sound like they have something attractive about their program. But then sometimes I do hear like a couple of people who have been sober 20, 25, 30 years. And I'm just like, this person sounds like they actually did the program. That's the person I want to be.
Well, in terms of your own struggle with it, I would say the struggle is always our unwillingness to actually practice the program, because the program is very simple, as Bill says. But he also said it's not always easy. Why? Because he knows that we're people that complicate things and that we're prone to getting into our thinking about it. Am I doing the right thing? I'm not doing what they're doing. I'm doing, rather than saying, you know what, wherever you are, you're doing what you're doing. Always. There's something you can absolutely rest assured on. Wherever you are, you're doing exactly what you're doing wherever you are. Any time of the day, you can always remind yourself of that. You're just doing whatever you're doing, period. No judgment in that. It's just a fact. It's a sum total of everything that's happening. And so too, by the way, is everybody else doing what they're doing. And so too is everything else doing what it's doing in that same comment. To think in terms that aren't based in reality, that are complete and whole, is to think in fractured terms. And we're going to feel fractured and conflicted. There's going to be something opposing something in that fractured state of thought. But it's self-induced. It's not reality. Reality doesn't operate that way. Reality doesn't change. Truth doesn't change. Love doesn't change. Principles don't change. If the nature of our existence is something that's stable and it doesn't change, the nature of our problems are unstable as a result of the thinking we do that doesn't align with that absolute premise. And it doesn't mean we're not aligned with that absolute premise. It means that our thinking isn't. So what we're experiencing is what we're thinking is wrong, not what's actually wrong. It's just thought. And I appreciate your insight, Nick, in that. Looks like he fell out of the group.
Uh-oh.
But, he struggled with that. And the struggle is self-imposed. It's not imposed on us ever. We're all given rights to be right. And we also have the right to be wrong. And to fight those things is what we're choosing to do with them, not what they are doing to us, ever. All that other stuff is happening, but nothing has a greater impact on us than the thing we create in our brain that lives where we feel, that also seems to reside where pleasure and pain are caused. So if we're feeling pain, it's coming from the brain. Our toe is not feeling. Our toe sends, we've talked about this before too. You stub your toe, it takes a second to feel it because that's the time it takes the nerve to communicate with the brain that you stubbed your toe. When it's in the brain, when the anguish is in the brain, the mental anguish, there's no time lapse. It's immediate. There's no distance. There's no way to get away from it. It's immediate. And there's nothing that can impact our experience greater than the disturbances we create within us. Nobody can have a greater impact. No thing, no body can have a greater impact because they're all at a distance. We can think they do, but again, we can think that we're not thinking what we're thinking. And if that's the case, that would say we could think all sorts of things that aren't true. Make up all sorts of stories to give ourselves some justification to try to make sense of insanity. And if you're trying to make sense of insanity, you're insane. It's like trying to talk reasonably to somebody who's irrational. It's just not going to help. It's the same thing about carrying the message. It says we try to carry the message because the final leg of that trip is not ours. It's the person to receive it. And to say, oh, I may be doing this too. I may be part of this too. Same with the mental obsession, since the mental obsession is the root of addiction in all the compulsions, all the reactiveness, all the impulsions. We wouldn't be reactive if we weren't defending something, and we wouldn't be defending something if we were only thinking in true terms. Backtracking a little bit, Gabe,
Yeah.
if you're still there, to the like
Yeah.
and don't like.
Mhm.
The real freedom is that we can choose to like and not like anything we want. We're not condemned to liking everything. We're not condemned to disliking everything. The fact is we have that choice.
I like to choose things that I can't change to not like.
Well, what's interesting is we don't seem to choose absolute things that don't change. We seem to
Yeah.
fight them in the choice of things that we think won't change when they're always changing.
Yeah, I'm not
If you follow
I'm
that.
not worried about changing things that I like or that I can't change. Or I mean I can change.
Well, one of the things that started
Fighting the absolute.
one of the things that started to help me by seeing everything, when I began to realize that the opposites are the same, because the opposites attract in the universe because they're not apart. They're always sharing some common ground. They're positions that I can take on a spectrum of good or bad, right or wrong, up or down, whatever the spectrum is that I'm dealing with. I can take a position and think that that's the only position, but when I take that position, I have a sense that I'm fighting every other position, when in fact, in reality, I'm confirming every other position because they're all connected, right? I wouldn't be able to take a position on a spectrum or a range if I weren't confirming the range I was taking the position on. Very different way of thinking about it than I used to think about it, as being, this is my position and I don't like your position and now we're going to fight over it. Rather than say, I'm actually confirming your position by taking any position, because we both have the right to choose what we want to think about the positions we take. Sort of equalizing. The other side of it that I began to realize is when I started to say, I like not liking this thing, I started to have a very different relationship, rather than the grind of my talking about how much I don't like something. Say, I must like it to not like it. I want it. If I want it, I began to realize I want everything I decide. Regardless of how it goes, I may be delusional about thinking it should only go where I thought I wanted. But if I'm actually choosing it and I know better, I must want whatever comes, regardless of whether it's what I thought would come.
Yeah, which hotel am I staying at?
Exactly.
your logic is clear. It's just we're not always logical beings, or I'm not. So
Well, my sense is as beings, we there is no logic. It's just absolute knowledge. So it doesn't have to go through a process to be knowing.
yeah.
Right. So the logic is always, even in the book, it says that in that page 37 that we were reading, it talks about he says, but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning. This trivial little thought is the one we go with. And that's the insanity of making believe that we're in control, that we're going to get it. We're going to make it this time. It's going to happen because we're trying once again. We become engulfed, consumed in making believe it's the only thing happening. And it isn't the only thing happening. It's our fight with the idea that we are the creators of reality and truth that give us that impression. And why do we use those things? Because they're not even happening, and we're trying to prove that what isn't happening is the only thing that is happening. We're trying to create out of nothing something, and we never do it. We just have an opinion about it that goes on, this droning opinion that goes on and on and on, and the impression of which is depressing.
Yeah. So, but even understanding the reality, we continue down that path.
Well, because I would say, don't understand reality. We haven't come to terms with it. We're obviously lacking in something that we're thinking. And to think of it in the broadest way is to begin to minimize the impulse to do those things, and also do those things without thinking of them as big and consuming as they used to be. Most of the things people struggle with in recovery from alcohol and drugs is not alcohol and drugs. There are other compulsions, other slighter compulsions, other things that may not cause the immediate death, but are certainly not healthy. And a lot of them are just reactiveness, angry, resentful, predisposition to just being grumpy and on edge and just disillusioned. If this has gone on through history, it is no wonder why we don't immediately pop out of our shell. That it takes a minute to just look and say, oh, if I'm getting better at seeing it clearly at all. One of the things that could also be missed, Gabe, is that as we get better, it's so natural to be better, we don't notice the progress we made from how bad it was. And Jana, you were talking about that a little bit. I'm not doing it the way I used to. You're starting to have that observatory capacity to notice this isn't as bad as it was.
Right.
But when it comes to mental illness, getting over a cold, we say we're better. Getting over some growth in mental illness means we're just better than worse. We're not as bad as we used to be, which means we've made some progress. And what is that progress? But a greater sense of awareness. If our awareness can always grow, then obviously we're constantly limiting our awareness to thinking about it only as we think it is, rather than conceding that we already have a greater knowing that's absolutely intact where we are, and we're paying no attention to it because all the attention we're paying is to the thinking we're doing about how aware we are, rather than say, oh no, that knowing awareness is absolutely knowing, and I know it now, and I wouldn't feel disturbed, I wouldn't feel conflicted, I wouldn't feel emotional turmoil if I didn't know better. And to think about these things accurately can pop some of the bubbles of the thinking by beginning to see, oh, those forms of awareness are in fact intact because I'm admitting it daily when I talk about what I know is wrong, what I see is wrong, what I feel is wrong, what I'm experiencing is wrong. I'm admitting that I am aware of something wrong. Why would that be if I didn't know what was right? And this identification is coming to terms with it. The book talks about coming to terms in our innermost self. What is that self? Buried in thinking. Why is it innermost? Why is it self-centered? It's as far from the edge as possible to keep from the confronting the fact that the limits of the thinking are absolutely the beginning of everything else rather than the end of anything. So my sense is, my experience is, as I talk about this more openly, the things that you're talking about, Gabe, that I can't seem to figure out on my own, I become witness to it in seeing it in someone else. And then it starts to certify the fact that we are much more than we think we are. And certainly not alone to be witnessing something so profound occurring in someone else simultaneous to our discussion. And then for me, I realized how bad I was at the discussion. I just had no experience of really being honest and open. And having the concern and regard for somebody to stand with them and share with them what I was thinking, whether it was right or wrong. And I tell them, I don't know if it's right, I don't know if it's wrong. It just happens to be what I'm thinking. And honesty isn't about thinking only right thoughts or only wrong. Honesty is about sharing what we're thinking and doing. If you're a thief and you stole something and you're honest, you say, I stole it. It doesn't mean it's right. It simply means you admitted what happened. And if I'm admitting what's happening now, I don't have to be right about it. I don't have to worry about saying the right thing. I don't have to worry about how they're going to receive it, to simply admit and think what I'm thinking, period. And it changes things dramatically immediately because there's so little of it, the wealth of it and the bountiness of it, the boundlessness of it and the bounty of it impact people in ways that they become receptive rather than deceptive, and rather than reactive, they become proactive in a conversation, and it changes. And that's really what we're here to do, is have that conversation on a more open basis and start to confirm the nature of what we're sharing rather than the idiosyncratic nature of all the things that we seem to be doing on our own or alone, separately.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing.
So how well do you think we're doing that here?
Well, we keep talking to each other and not to new people. So,
well, that's the start point, though, and that's the idea. The new people who are listening out there, who haven't been listening, who are listening now, are the chance to begin to communicate with people. We don't have to see them to know that if the basis of our existence is the same as their existence, we know them well enough to know that wherever they are, if they're listening, they're hearing things we're saying, and the better we can communicate that collectively, the better they may be able to start creating a little bit of a perspective shift and start to notice that they're part of something much bigger than the limited thinking they're doing. So we have the potential today to talk to the world openly and honestly. And I don't see it as a job that would include any less than that. Because
yeah, I think what you were talking about is practicing these principles in all our affairs, is to also do that outside of this conversation. You know, to do
and with the people we're struggling with, and starting to have it in a way that's different than speaking.
Speaking of people, other people.
Here comes my tea and my tangerine. Thank you. So if we can do it here, I would suggest we have all gotten better at it, even if it became something that we're sort of on a rampage trying to force down somebody else's throat.
Oh, that's me. I still want to defend my reliability.
Yeah. Well, there wouldn't be any defense if you're not struggling with unreliability. So notice the opposite of what we're thinking, and you'll start claiming it because it's happening. It becomes so much easier to do all this because it's no longer embarrassing to be in the face of people you know are probably doing the same thing. And the chance to actually communicate openly is the chance to redeem all of us from this seeming drowning nature that is not natural. It's only natural in insanity. It's only natural in abnormality. And it only seems that way because it isn't that way. Things aren't how they seem, they're how they are.
That's pretty profound, but truth.
Yes. Think of what profound is. It means for finding. Herb Cage shared, he said when he first got sober, he was always seeking. And when he finally realized what was going on, he started finding.
I think I'm missing the high of someone stating my reliability, like that. Yes. They were, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I totally
admiration.
That's what I'm fucking missing. And that's
very good.
that's just an illusion anyway, because I am what I am and they are what they are. But I was on this little high for a while because I felt there was a connection, but the connection wasn't real. It wasn't neutral. It was a fucking admiration. Exactly. That's what
But
it
it was
was.
you had a contractual expectation that if you did this, they would do that, and it would confirm what you did.
Exactly. And we even discussed it. I mean, there was an agreement. And then all of a sudden I was having fun with the 6-year-old. We went to a little dance last night, a family friendly dance. We were having fun. And I got this text going like, basically, I don't trust in your reliability. I'm questioning it. And I was like, what? Wait a minute.
Well, she's noticing the same lack of reliability you're noticing by thinking that you need her to confirm it because your own doubt doesn't give you the confirmation of your own experience. Follow me?
The high is completely muted.
Yeah, well, but so here in the thinking, Jana, if you begin to notice that everybody's already intact, that if there's something absolute, we all have it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to think we have it to have it.
Right.
Just like we don't have to think drinking's a problem to drink.
Or convince or cajole.
Nothing. In Bill Wilson's emotional sobriety letter, he said he realized that he was very attached to admiration and stature.
Yeah, I'm like, Bill, that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind, if we share something right in common, chances are we're all doing everything in the exact same way that's wrong. And if we go back to that paragraph I just read, listen to what he says. You may think this is an extreme case, the case of somebody taking this trivial idea and making it great. So great as to think it's the only thing he can do. Mm-hmm. To us, it's not far-fetched. For this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. Mm-hmm. Why? We put different faces on it because our circumstances are different and we're in different places, and we think that makes us exceptional and then wonder why we feel alone because now we've accepted ourselves from being part of everything, making believe what we do is different. It isn't. It's the same. What we do wrong is the same. What we do right is the same. Mm. That makes it very simple compared to extremely complex in thinking I need to sort out all the varied fractured states I created to imagine it's who I was and think once I do more thinking about that insanity, I'll get better. But who would I be to be thinking about insanity and thinking I'm going to even appeal to insanity, but insane? So I'm using the same thinking to treat the same problem and wondering why the problem doesn't go away. Insanity is insanity. It's interesting that it would be insane. Think about that. Sanity is not insane. You would think being insane would be to be insanity. Mm. But in fact, what are we? Stuck in our thinking. We're stuck in our thinking. We're just thinking about our 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 thinking all the time, thinking that somehow we're going to get this right. We're going to get it right. It's wrong, but we're going to get it right. There's a conflict right there.
Well, even if we're getting our illusional way, you can't just ride that freaking high forever. It's not natural. It's not the essence of who we are, that admiration, that... You
know what the high is?
What?
It's adrenaline and fear. We know that it's not right. We get a boost of this adrenaline that one of my sponsors used to say, he said, when I got sober, I got addicted to adrenaline.
Oh, fuck.
It's corrosive in our system because it's there for emergencies, and we create a 911 call 24 hours a day, eroding our capacity in our human capacity to be functionally literate enough to be useful to others. Our own health is at risk. We're cannibalizing ourselves from the inside out by creating an acidic environment in our own bodies by releasing all that stuff constantly, thinking the high is worth it. We're actually using chemicals again, substance abuse in our own body, thinking we're sober.
Yeah.
That's what emotional hangovers are.
Oh.
We've released so much stuff into our system that by morning we're just exhausted, worn out.
Yeah.
So talking about it openly and actually peering beyond the edges of the thoughts we have that we feel pretty sure about is really beginning to venture into what we think is a void, but is actually the substance of awareness. And as it's expressed, it becomes clearer to us that we know a lot more than we're thinking we know. And the basis becomes easier to notice, not because all of the disturbing things go away, but because they become seen as disturbing because that's what they are. And they become seen as wrong because that's what they are. And all of a sudden, there's no sting in that because you're simply aligning to things that are going on that are wrong and disturbing, as disturbing and wrong. There's no fight at all. You just notice with clarity again. This is recovery of the mental condition, just like recovery of the alcoholism. You notice, I don't have any obligation to keep doing that at all. There's no fight when you start aligning and seeing things accurately. The fight comes from thinking about them inaccurately and thinking the only thing you can do is prove you're right about the wrong thought by thinking more and more and more about them. Someday they'll be true. Not now, ever, but someday, sometime in the future. The next thing I do will be right. The next thing I do will be right. Tomorrow will be better. The future will be great. And yet we live with a sense of doom. And it isn't the doom of the future we're experiencing, it's the present doom we're creating in the ideas we have that we think are true that are doomed because they have no basis. They're already doomed now. That's what we're experiencing. We don't experience things from the future. We experience what we think of the future in the present, always.
I even said yesterday in our mutual admiration, oh my God, it feels like Christmas. What the fuck?
It is.
It's so clear now that that wasn't a healthy state of being for an alcoholic like me. That's for sure.
Well, and starting to see the thinking is something that's pervasive within humanity because it's possible for all humans to dysfunction on the same basis every moment. And you know why it's possible? Because all things that are possible are always possible wherever we are. When what's new about that is that if we've burned ourselves out in certain respects, those things are still possible to redo now. And if we've never done those things before, they're still possible to do now. It doesn't matter what we've done, it matters what we do. And it doesn't matter what's done, it matters what's undone when it comes to the thinking. Do I need to redo it to continue to weave myself back into the cocoon? Or am I willing to notice that the cocoon is designed to fall apart at some point so I can continue to fly and be light and airy and not non-substantive, but think of light, which is one of the prevalent aspects of life. It doesn't have any weight. Think of where it comes from and where it is all the time. There doesn't seem to be any weight to it at all. It's light, which would be brightness, enlightenment. Certainly not density, where we start to conflict and think the conflicted state of our thinking actually creates a block, when in fact all it does is create shadows of doubt, because we doubt what we're doing enough to admit it and experience it. And then we misinterpret it as something to get away from rather than say, oh, it's happening now. It must be what I'm doing now. I can live with that. And just start to do it as simple as possible. Acknowledge what's happening is happening. Like it or not.
I
All of
like
a
the
sudden-
high. The high was fun.
Well, it seems fun, but it leads to a degenerative experience because our body, the recovery of the body to heal does not heal well under the constant assault of that internal
Angst.
Yeah, whatever is being generated, the conflict and all that that's creating the anxiety and the stress and the chronic disturbance and pressure, all those things are having impacts on our body that are not healthy at all. And we're relying on this sort of burst of emergency adrenaline and any of the other things that we can utilize to give ourselves this immediate impression that everything's fine, when in fact it's killing us, literally. And that's a great definition of addiction. Again, we think we got it all handled. We think we're in control, but things that are out of control, literally like powerlessness, there is no power in powerlessness. It doesn't mean less power. Things out of control have no control because there's nothing to them. You can't control something that doesn't exist. What would there be to control? The only thing there is to control is what you think is there, and that's delusion. That's insanity to think there's anything to control. So how do we act? Out of control to prove it. We witness it and deny it. Think of it as something else rather than just simply concede it and start saying, oh, the identity's always been here. It isn't who I am, it's just what I'm doing. And there's nothing in a being nature that's ever disrupted. It's only what we think is going on that we become consumed by. So any of the disturbances are coming from thinking, not our being nature, not God hating us, not some external force doing to us what we can't deal with. If we can be free of alcohol, we can be free of all the other compulsions and impulses and reactivity.
Well, that's a bold statement, but I get it.
Well, you know the clause in the big book where it says, having been granted perfect release from alcohol,
Yeah.
from alcoholism, why shouldn't we, by the same means, be able to achieve perfect release from every other difficulty and defect? And he goes on to say, perhaps this is the riddle of the universe, who are confounded by riddles, but humans, thinkers. And the next sentence is, perhaps the answer is only in the mind of God, meaning perhaps the answer is we are in the mind of God. We are of that consciousness, not need to get there, not need to go there, not need to get it back, or all we're getting back when we get it back is our conscious awareness of it at a human level. We've always had it at a knowing level.
Yeah, not to get back or to get through or to get there. We're here.
Exactly.
I get that.
So now that doesn't mean we can't think of the past or the future or plan or any of that stuff. It means that when the stability of our absolute state of being is recognized, now we can actually start planning. What I've learned to do is say, here's what I would like out of this, but I know what's going to happen is going to happen, whether I like it or not. In the beginning. So I'm not front loading the thing with all these reactive defenses that I need to constantly be on alert and on guard all the way to make sure that I'm getting the puck to the goal.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, you know what? There may be more going on here that would be very enlightening to let it go where it goes rather than where I think it should, because if I'm only learning, I'm at least becoming aware of things I would be unwilling to notice if it weren't for the experience I'm creating. And all of a sudden, it becomes a natural GPS system where it's saying, okay, turn around at the next light. You just made a wrong turn. Kind of
I had a funny thought the other day where I was thinking something, then I realized, you know what, that's not even true. I'm totally wrong on that. And I thought hypothetically, what if I was just wrong on everything that I know? And I go, no, that's not possible. But then I thought, that would be funny. Everybody is so stuck on their ideas that if you told somebody, is it possible you're wrong about everything you think? They would go, no. But if you take it to the other side and go, yeah, maybe I'm wrong about everything. It's just such a
Anthony,
strange.
That's the identification of you beginning to claim. It doesn't matter what other people think about that. It really doesn't matter. What matters initially is what you do with what you have. And when you begin to admit that, and I think I said that earlier, that I realized almost everything, if not everything, unless I was thinking in absolute terms that I think of, is always self-serving, a self that I think I am and in need of something.
Yeah.
I don't tend to think of myself anymore as that thinking. I just think of the thinking as I have desires. I want things. I don't think of it is self-serving in that same sense. And yet some of it is, because I still think a part of my thinking is who I am.
Yeah, that was page 62. Whatever our protestations are, not most of us concerned with ourselves, our resentments, our self-pity, our selfishness, our self-centeredness. Yeah, that's it.
Thinking our thoughts are who we are. All of those things you just identified are natural reflections of making believe who we are is what we think. And that's all that it is. It's nothing more than that. And all that it is thinking about our thinking. It isn't thinking about ourself. It isn't talking to ourself. It is thinking about ourself and talking to our thoughts. When I think there's a self to talk to, I've got a split personality. And I'm trying to control that personality when it doesn't exist and wonder why I spend so much time thinking about myself when I could be thinking about what's actually happening. And I know something's wrong. I feel it. But I think the wrong because I'm involved in that thought with more thought is going to fix the thing that's actually breaking the thing. So I end up doing the thing that's causing the problem, and that's addiction. It's very simple.
You just have to earnestly pray for the right idea, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity and the strength to do the next right thing.
And I would say that that witness is beginning to accept what's going on as it's going on now and allow it to be what it is. And intuition naturally evolves out of that because I'm not thinking about my thinking anymore. I'm allowing thinking to begin to express knowingness that isn't based in rationale, understanding, or thought. It's a knowing of knowing. What does that mean? It knows a lot more than I think I know. And what am I going to do? Think things that I would never imagine thinking and do things I would have never imagined possible because I've entered into seemingly the world of the spirit, the absolute state of being.
I thought you were going to say the Twilight Zone.
Well, in a way, yes. But the point is, I'm really not entering it, but I'm feeling like I'm entering it because I have been thinking, my source was thinking so long that I've been away from it. And that is a more fundamental thing to come to terms with, is to realize we've never been away. We can't be away from something that's absolute, but we can think we do. So when I think I'm returning, I'm still using my thinking as my context for experience rather than a knowing nature where I say, no, it's impossible that I ever left, but I can think I did. And now I'm addressing it a little clearer in my own thinking. So it isn't as profound because literally it's something I never lost. You can't lose something that can't be found.
Okay, so on page 49, it says, when, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful guiding creative intelligence. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves that this isn't so.
Yeah.
That's it. That's fucking it. I need to just do that.
You see what he's saying, though, is that we have perfect clarity of what's wrong.
Right.
Because we know, we don't have to think we know what's right. And if you witness yourself and lots of other people in our own interactions, most of us seem to have, it says just at the top of 64, I think he talks about most of us have come to the conclusion that people are wrong. He said that's about as far as we've gone. We didn't include us in that equation, right? Interesting that we would have such great clarity about what's wrong in others while we're unwilling to notice what's wrong in us. And I would say that's another disproportionate approach to thinking that I am the exception while I include everyone else in my presumptions. I think of the world and it's, well, nobody's ever, we hear it in here, nobody's ever going to do that. We talk about everybody in the stroke of a sentence. We've written everybody else off as doing being honest and looking at things accurately. And it's interesting how quick we talk about everybody and how slowly we tend to talk about our own experience.
Oh, no, I'm all about my own experience. I want to be a spearhead of God's ever-advancing creation, one of his intelligent agents.
Yeah, well, you are. And now
I'm just not aware of it yet.
Yes, exactly. It's our thinking awareness that we're introducing this to. It's not our absolute awareness. Our absolute awareness knows. And we, again, wouldn't know what's wrong if we didn't know what's right.
Well, I thought everything was all right till I got questioned.
Yeah, well, delusion is easy to pretend is true.
Fuck, I was happy as a clam. It was like Christmas yesterday, and today I'm laboriously trying to defend against fucking reality. And I know it's wrong. I do. I'm very aware of the fact that my thinking was not my best thinking.
But see the freedom in that too, Jenna, that you're just witnessing it for what it is, which if it's self-imposed, it's just a thought. It's not anything real. It's just a thought opposing the ideas it's a thought defending the ideas that you think are true that aren't true. So you're actually being given the chance to witness it. And while it's uncomfortable, beginning to live with the discomfort is beginning to acknowledge the actual effects of what you're creating. and they dissipate. They will literally dissolve, because this isn't about resolution where you're resolving to feel better about something while maintaining what's wrong. It's about literally being with, in a meditative, contemplative, aware, awakened state, what's happening, and allowing it to be what's happening, because it is happening, regardless of whether we allow it, and start to acknowledge it in our thinking. And all of a sudden our thinking gets to relax.
It's a concession.
Yes, I would say a surrender, concession, acknowledgement,
Conceding.
witness, observation.
Oh,
notice.
witness is good. I like that, witness.
Yeah. But to witness something, you can't be the thing you're witnessing. To observe something, you can't be the thing you're observing. Right? To concede something means you're doing something.
Oh,
That's the concession. And starting to see that we have this awareness. We've been aware the whole time. We've been pretending we weren't. And that's the mental illness. The thing we absolutely are, we deny. The thing we absolutely aren't, we're consumed with. Exactly what he talked about in terms of that proportionate problem. That trivial idea becomes everything.
well, I'm very familiar with that. I'm like a fucking expert.
Well, the next paragraph says we all do it.
Oh, I thought it was all about me.
Well, we can talk about you,
Yeah.
and we can talk about there being a you to talk about.
The essence.
Yeah, the essence is absolute. It's always with us. And we wouldn't know better. We wouldn't feel worse if we didn't know.
I'm trying to feel worse than I do. I swear to God, it's so familiar to me to feel worse. And I really feel in my sick mental state that I should feel worse than I do. And somehow I don't. And I fucking know I'm going to leave this meeting and try and conjure up some self-pitying bullshit. And I'm going to try to avoid that as best I can. I might go jump in the waterfall. It's freezing down there right now or something like that.
So don't try to avoid it as best you can. Acknowledge it, and just begin to notice. You're really touching, Jana, on the fact that the one thing we control, Bill says in the book, avoid the deliberate manufacture of misery.
That's what I want to do so bad. I want to deliberately manufacture my own misery. So
Exactly.
then
You know why?
Later on a personal conversation and whine to you.
Do you know why?
I don't know, because it's familiar.
Self-control wants to make believe that the one thing it controls is the misery of maintaining a self that doesn't exist.
Oof.
Now think of this. You've heard of self-defense?
Sure.
A self thought to be existence depends on defense. So it is self-defensive all the time. This is a martial art that we've developed in a self that doesn't exist. And in our thinking, we've got Cato and some kung fu master fighting us constantly in thinking to make believe that we need to overcome that self that doesn't even exist, because we've mastered the thinking about the thinking to make believe that if we think about it more, it's going to come true. Not so. Never will, never was, never can.
Conjuring up the self-pity or the sadness is to cover up my shame in having let myself play that illusion out. You know what I mean? Like I was playing it out because I was getting the chemical reactions to it. It was super fun. I even stated that it felt like Christmas. We were both, totally into it. And then when it came to a screeching halt, now I'm kind of ashamed. And so to cover up my shame or to make my behavior valid or legitimate, I need to be sad about it. Instead, I'm just going to fucking own it. It's kind of shameful. I fucked up. It's not okay.
But wait a minute. If it's happening, why would it not be okay?
That's true. Everything's okay because it is what it is in the absolute. I get that.
Exactly. So listen, the shame is your road sign. That it might be a shame when you're doing 80 miles an hour to see a stop sign, right?
Yeah, that's
But
what happened.
If you blow through it, the greater shame might be the car crossing the intersection or the kid or somebody.
Well,
The point is that shame is a road sign. It's a body language saying you're thinking something that's shameful. You're guilty for something you're thinking. The guilt is not in our essence as a being. The guilt is in the thinking we're doing for the thinking we're doing. To think that we need to get rid of it and stop it and avoid it and fight it is exactly what perpetuates it, because it's a new form of opposition. Now we're seeing it clearer, and seeing it clearer is something we want to fight. So we fight it harder and wonder why it continues. Just embrace it. It's already, you think you need to acknowledge it? You don't. It's already happening. You think you need to accept it? You don't. It's already happening. Begin to concede that if it's happening, regardless of what you think. And a normal level of acceptance and gratitude will come, because you'll have it for what it is and let it be what it is, because it is what it is. And you'll see if it's delusional, that you absolutely have recovered choice and beginning to either decide to continue doing it or not doing it. And if you don't do it a little bit, and a little bit is more than the most you've ever done, it's going to seem dramatically different in your experience, and as though you have resolved the problem, while there still may be some of that problem to apply the same solution to, the same accuracy of saying, oh, as the top of the iceberg melts, a little more of the iceberg comes up.
Did
And
you hear what you said?
eventually it melts.
You
As
said-
global warming is proving, the glaciers are going to melt.
You said a normal level to me of acceptance and gratitude. So since I have no level of normalcy, maybe I'm getting a level, well, of course my essence has a normalcy, but I mean,
Yes. Very good.
It's becoming aware to me. And I just thought it's amusing, but it's also truth, a normal level of acceptance and gratitude.
But
and
what happens is it's normal because it's automatic. It's not something, going back to the top of 84, where he says the problem, we're taken to what feels like, we're placed in what feels like a place of neutrality.
Yeah, that's
where
it.
It's automatic. It says it's automatic. We don't have to think or expend any effort for it. It just happens. It does not exist for us anymore. Why? Because the delusion has been dispelled. Literally dispelling the illusion is taking the words off of the stories we tell. All of a sudden, they're not there. What are we going to do about it? See it more clearly. If there's more to see, we're going to see that clearly too, rather than think, oh, fuck, here I am again, in the face of the same thing. I'm such an idiot. Rather than saying, no, I'm actually just being given accurate information about what's happening now. And since the only thing ever happening is happening in the present, if I start getting good at being present in terms of my thinking, I can remedy any problem immediately and allow the problem to continue to be exactly what it is, and probably not make that problem worse as a result.
There's worse levels of shame. I could have actually gotten on the airplane. At least this other person isn't geographically available, and it all happened over the phone. And even though I was prompted to get on a plane, I didn't do it. There must be some level of sanity in that.
Well, consider your essence is perfectly sane, because it's the root of all things. It's the root of truth and reality. And it's just what you're struggling with and thinking that is imposing any other idea.
That's where a good co-conspirator could help you out right there, Jenna.
I know. And I didn't pick up the phone and ask anybody. Well, no, I did ask someone. I did ask my girlfriend that has 34 years of sobriety, and said, well, you're going to do what you're going to do, but I would suggest you take a pause for 24 hours before you buzz down to the airport. And that pause brought doubt, that brought me into question, that I got to share all this with you, and we unwound it. And now I feel like a butterfly. I feel so much better about everything.
So, Jenna, the broader you can be in your thinking about this, rather than think of it as circumstantial, begin to say, oh, this applies to everything I ever think, everything I've ever thought.
Yeah.
Right? As you start to consider it in the broadest way, start to say, oh, the underpinning of this is what causes all those different circumstances to appear different, because I'm almost trying to be lost in the camouflage of all these different problems I create, rather than say it's the same problem and it's based in thinking. Thinking is true and real, when in fact, thinking is just what thinking does, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be true or real for us to think. We don't have to have the ultimate answer to choose to want to have breakfast and eat something and think the food might be better at the restaurant, or find out that the food is better at the restaurant than we thought. Our circumstances are going to give us information about the thinking we're doing, which gives us an elevated awareness that gives us a chance to learn and grow in relation to our environment, rather than think we need to be shut off from it in some way because we're constantly posing things in these limited ways, thinking somehow we're going to secure this little bit and not notice that it's causing an effect, a ripple effect on everything that we're doing.
So I didn't blow through the stoplight.
Yeah. Yeah, you can notice the sign. It's like a dead end sign. You don't have to go to the end of the dead end to figure out the sign was right. you can actually just say, oh, dead end. I don't have to go down there. Generally, it says dead end or no outlet. So I could go into those outlets, which I've done, and thinking, oh, there's got to be a way. They're just telling you that because they don't want traffic in the neighborhood. And then I realized, no, there's no way out here. Okay, I'll go back. Start over. So if the present is always present, and we're always in the present, we always are present, our essence is always present fully. It's what we're doing now that's affecting our experience. Nothing more than that. Doesn't mean there aren't other things we can think about, because there's lots of little details of management that go on during the day that we can and do have control over. It doesn't mean we can absolutely control them and have them succumb to our wishes and wants, but it simply means that we are controlling them by what we're doing in terms of our interactive engagement with them. Doesn't mean they're not in control or out of control. It means that they're doing whatever they're doing. And when we realize we're having influence in all that, it starts to actually perk us up, because the responsibility of that becomes a little more apparent than the irresponsibility of making believe it's all happening to us rather than being caused by us.
Oh.
Oh no.
Oh no, I'm cool with that. I'm good with that. I'm conceding to the fact that my whole big thing, my whole dialogue every day, all day is responsibility. I don't know what happened. I got distracted or something. I lost my mind for like a week.
Well, listen, being absolutely responsible does not mean we can't think and act irresponsibly. It means that when we do think and act irresponsibly, we can concede that we are thinking and acting irresponsibly. No harm, no foul. That means we can correct whatever we're doing. That's the whole process of this discussion, is looking at correcting by not redoing, but undoing the things that would give us impressions that all we are the impressions we make, and start to realize that who we are, it's not impressionable at all, because it's not based in time and space. It's not based in weight or distance or any of that stuff. It isn't here and not there. It's here always. It isn't there in some other place. It's here. It's now. It's present.
Give me a good sentence to unwind my dialogue with this other human. I just woke up and I decided this was all an illusion and the movie's over.
My experience is, when I admit that I love people, and that the nature of the love I love them with is the nature of the source of the love that I am created by and manifest by and of, rather than something I do, I begin to share with them what I realize they are also sharing with me. And it's simultaneous, and it dispels a lot of the rumors I create about what keeps us apart and what should have been, what could have been, what might have been, because I start seeing what actually is, and what is can't be short in any way. If it's absolute, it's everything. It isn't some things, somewhere, sometime. It's now, always, everything.
What changed, Jana? I never heard what changed the stop. What happened? Why did you decide not to go?
Well, I took the pause, right? Because I talked to my girlfriend. I think she's got fucking 38 years or something crazy. She doesn't mean she's not crazy, but she kind of laughed and said, well, you're going to do what you're going to do, but I would take 24 hours and think about this before you jump on the plane. So I did. And because of the pause, I was then questioned about my reliability or my commitment or my whatever the fuck. I got this text going, hey, wait a minute. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, why am I being questioned? And then I thought, well, this whole thing's bullshit anyway. And I'm glad I took the pause, because otherwise I would have woken up in Malibu today.
And that's one of your cores, is that you want to be responsible for things that you say you're going to do. So she hit you on that. And that's a source. That's like a a button for you, I think.
No,
'Cause
that wasn't a button for me at all. She was being helpful. She suggested that I take a pause before I just run to the airport.
No, I
And
don't mean your sponsor. I don't mean the sponsor. I mean the girl that you were going to meet.
it was a guy, first of all.
Oh, God. A guy you were going to meet.
He didn't like that I took the pause because it was like Christmas all week long. There was so much dialogue back and forth about this coming together.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I didn't say I'm going to think about it. I said, we'll see whatever happens, something like that. Or I'll see you when I see you. Or I don't know, whatever I said didn't sit well.
Yeah.
And so then I just got this little message that said, are you really into this? Or rah, rah, rah? And then I thought, oh, that's kind of telling that this is all kind of an illusion. But it wasn't a button. It was
well, when they said you weren't following through on what you said you were going to do, kind of thing. I think that is something.
So, Anthony, something for you to notice is how invested you are in the story and how important.
Well, because I can relate to the story because that happens to me all the time.
It's what I'm saying. This is exactly what I'm saying. You can relate to the story, and we're relating to the principles. That's the focus. So I mention it because it's worth noting.
And don't manipulate other people's stories or their feelings. It's not fair.
Well, listen, it's all a manipulation if we think we're going to manufacture something that isn't happening. It's all some kind of influence that we're exerting. The difference is if we're looking for the story to give us information, we're looking to perfect our story so we can think we're better. And that's just
I was struggling to answer him. I was like, what?
No, I understand.
Right? I think the story has a lot to do with it. You can't just talk principles. You got to talk the story. Otherwise, you would never be able to figure it out.
No, because stories are bullshit. It could be any fucking story in the world. Nothing's relevant to the story. It's the principles. Sticking with the principles. It's the only. There are no stories.
You have to have a story. I mean, the principles are important, but you can't have it without a story. There is a story.
Yes, you can. We say that all the time.
Tell me one thing possible without a story.
Okay, so there's
the present moment is not a story. It is everything going on right now. There is no narrative attached to it whatsoever.
But she wasn't talking about that. She was talking about
Anthony, you asked a question which I just answered, and you
didn't answer it. Okay, tell me about the present right now without telling me a story.
There's no story.
Tell me about the present then.
There's no story. Everything that's happening is happening. Everything that's happening. Everything that's happening is happening, regardless of what I think, Anthony. It doesn't happen because I'm thinking about it. It's happening as it's happening without my thinking. There is no narrative in that. None. It's what I think about and what I talk about that I think becomes reality that isn't reality, that I struggle with. That's all. It isn't to say we can't think. We're designed to think. It's to say that when we make believe our thinking becomes truth and reality, we think we are the creators of truth and reality, which we are not. And then we immediately think who we are is only what we think. It's the whole basis of this conversation. And if I think all I am is what I think, I become very concerned about what other people think. And when they don't think like I do, I think I'm attacked. And when things don't go the way I think they should, I think the world and life is difficult. When it's my thinking that I'm coming up against, nothing more than that. It isn't to say I can't do that. It's to say that when I do that, those things happen that way, as I just described. Now, that may be a story, but it's illuminating something that would be consistent between all of us if, in fact, it's a way to malfunction within thinking. If the premise of our existence is the same and we are all designed to think, the chances are the thinking we're doing that's wrong is going to be done wrong in the exact same way, just as we talked about 30 minutes ago or so.
The absolute isn't negotiable, and the natural essence of our being exceeds our human experience. And that's why I don't think the stories are relevant, Anthony. I think that people try to find loopholes to get around the principles because, and I think you've heard me say this before, like someone will say, well, I slept with my uncle Henry for 17 years. And so I have every reason in the world to be bitter and jacked up. And I'll preface who I am when I walk into a room. I have a lot of nervous disorders because I used to sleep with my uncle. Well, that's not happening to you right now. So it's not the essence of who you are. And I mean, that's a loophole. They're going to find some loophole to not live by the principles. And
most of the stories are used to generate the opinion to excuse us from the responsibility we have for what we've done.
Exactly.
That's what most stories are done. Now, not all. When I grew up, they used to talk about the moral of the story. You don't hear that much anymore, but you hear our stories as being truth and reality. And Anthony, you get stuck on this and hang on this a lot because you look for information, opinions, all kinds of stuff to help feed your story to get it right. It's never been right yet, and you're always feeling the discomfort of it. It's not going to be right the more of that you do. The point is, we can look at the morals of stories, and that would be actually revealing the principle. And the difference is, it doesn't become our story. It becomes moralistic because it is applicable to everyone, everywhere, and all things everywhere, because the principles revealed are shared by all those things and all those people. Now, immediately, the immoral story, we try to distinguish ourselves with these stories we tell to make us look unique and wonder why we feel alone. We're trying to create the idea we're apart by these stories we use immorally, and then wonder why we're lonely. It's not an accident that we feel lonely when we're working so hard to think that what we're thinking is all we are, which becomes us alone and apart from everything else. You cannot be apart from something you're a part of, ever. You can think you are, and I would say that's delusion, and the stories that come out of that, as you repeat them, just become a refined version of more and more of the same shit. It isn't to say we can't do it, but when we're doing it, we're basically maintaining and manufacturing the misery that reflects the insanity that we're making believe is true and real.
You know, it was interesting during my dialogue with this human, and that's why I've been very non-specific, because there are no stories, but he did say, like, we were having dialogue back and forth, and it was Christmas, and we were having so much fun, and he just stated, how come all of a sudden I feel really lonely?
Yeah.
That was very telling. That was very telling.
And, you know, in a conversation last week when John was here, you know, Anthony, and you basically, John was very deep in his story. He was expressing a lot. He's intelligent. He's done a lot. He's fought a lot. He's been used to being a combatant his whole life. He suffered as a kid. His father beat him and brutalized him. And at some point you said, do you have obsessive thoughts? And I was even engaging around the story. I was trying to unravel some of the storytelling, right? But I wasn't being effective because it was continuing. And you said, do you have any obsessive thoughts? And what happened? He completely stopped the storytelling.
Yeah.
It's saying, yes, I think about that stuff. Completely shifted gears because you observed.
Well, he was almost trying to deny it is the reason I mentioned it.
But there you go. There you go.
Yeah.
You had the clarity that he was denying it by the story he was telling, but missed that clarity in your own interest in developing a new story. Follow?
Until that last sentence.
I'm sure that wasn't the one you wanted to hear. You saw it in him with perfect clarity. You struggle with that because the single dimensional focus of a self-centered thought has no dimension. It has no perspective. So we often don't think we're even doing the thing that we see clearly in somebody else. When we see that.
Well, I like the stories. I'm okay with stories, but I was just getting a feeling he was not accepting the whole reason of mental obsession.
Exactly. So you were seeing what you are doing and thinking it was him.
Well, and I have to state another thing, that I was briefly aware that things were not normal or that they were going awry, that I was manipulating. So like 3 days ago, like 5 days into our little obsessive thing, I said, I said, I have to apologize. This is just not happening. And he immediately called and said, hey, wait a minute. No, this is great. And I admittedly, I will concede to the fact that because it felt like Christmas again, I fucking got reeled right back in. And I continued the story, and it was stupid and it was irresponsible of me. It was kind of fun. I admit it was kind of fun. And I almost got on a plane behind it. The ticket was waiting for me, but I didn't do it. And so that's some sort of sanity. I had glimpses that it wasn't going awry, but I was more addicted to the chemicals that it was producing in my sober body. And I was digging it.
Those
And-
consequences will always be those consequences. And that's always what we're looking for, is that immediate self-gratification that we can create by feeling a little better while we're doing the thing that's worse. That's exactly what addiction is. Nobody has ever come to me, and I've worked with hundreds of people over the years, and ever said, I want to think more wrong thoughts and more negative thoughts. I want to think more negatively and experience more unhappiness.
Yeah, that doesn't balance it out. It doesn't balance the high out. The real gift, the true gift of all of this is the neutrality.
Well, because there's balance in neutrality, and there's no balance in thinking something is one way and detached from every other way it's connected to. That's just a disproportionate. That's exactly where this lack of proportion in the top of the page we've been reading today is discussing. We take the tiniest idea, the most trivial idea, and turn it into everything because we want to make believe that somehow, someday we're going to be able to create reality out of absolutely nothing. Everything that's real already exists. It's already everything that it is. It doesn't need our interpretation of it. It doesn't need our expression of it. It doesn't need us to transform it into something to prove it. It's already here. It doesn't need proof. It doesn't fight for proof. It's already in reach, accessible, available to each of us as we are, where we are now, always. It's already done, complete, whole. To think it isn't, and to think our thinking about it becomes true, is where this dysfunction starts. And you can see that even in our discussion, we loop around this and loop around this and loop around this and loop around this, and seem to need to go into these circles before we start to concede a little bit more about what we're doing, because the pain of doing it is the touchstone of growth. Why would we need pain to grow if it wasn't pain we were creating that was constricting the growth? What are we doing? We're trying to avoid pain. What are we trying to do? Feel better than the pain. What are we doing? Pretending we're not doing what's hurting. We're becoming numb, insensitive, desensitized. That isn't, being in a coma is not the highest point of life. Acting as though we're asleep is not the highest potential awareness that we have. It's a possibility, but that dream state, that waking dream state, becomes a nightmare very, very quickly. And the same as nightmares imposed on us in our sleeping state, we feel the same fear during our waking state because we know something's going on that's wrong. We're aware of it. We're clearly aware of it. Any of the struggle, the identification of this is starting to say, wow, I have been doing this as long as I have been doing anything. I mean, when I began to accept I had always been doing it from the beginning and begin to see that I'm still doing it now, I began to get free of it in a very substantial way, because I wasn't dickering over it and trying to negotiate it and trying to say, well, it's only now because of this, and it wasn't because of that, and it was this thing, that all those other things that I've been trying to slice and dice and come up with a whole stopped.
Or
And
yeah,
now I can still launch. I can still launch when circumstances go where I don't want them to, and I get a little overwhelmed, but I know what I'm doing immediately. And I can take a breath and say, okay, this is going on. At what point will I begin to address it rationally and soundly, rather than react to it in ways that are insane and create a bigger problem, which I'm very good at doing.
Well, the defense of our previous traumas making us act disproportionate to what is, I'm just over that.
Well, but think about it. When you think it's making you do anything, you're discounting the making of it that you're doing.
No, I don't think it's making me do anything. I think that there's a defense. No, I think that there's a defense out there that's pretty common that
yes, but it's not out there. It's not out there.
Okay, well, it's in my, so I'm not
in your
defending.
brain.
I'm not defending, and I'm glad I could share my shame, because I feel like I can trust you guys, and I feel like I'm in a place of love, and I feel like I'm
to any degree, Janet, to any degree you're maintaining a thought that's wrong that you think is right, there's a defense to maintain that. Anytime, anywhere. So to say you're not doing it while you are doing it is another way of making believe that you're better than you are, and as a result, creating the new worsening condition.
Well,
and I'm not suggesting.
I'm aware.
I know you are. I know you are.
That's all. It doesn't mean I'm not doing it, but I'm
Listen
aware.
to your words, though, and you'll see that your words are reflecting thinking that still thinks you're not doing things you're doing. And that concession becomes a bounty of information, because you start seeing it globally as to what you're doing rather than locally. only the minimized things that you're struggling with, compared to saying, wow, I'm doing this at a very broad level. But now you can affect everything you're thinking by seeing it as something you're absolutely doing in any way you're doing it, without trying to qualify it and disqualify it according to what you think. Just begin to concede that if it's going on, it's going on. And if I'm doing it, I'm doing it. If I'm doing it, I'm experiencing things that are disturbing. And when I am disturbed, that is an absolute clear vision of something I am looking at that is disturbing. Period. Over. Done. No conflict there at all. So it becomes the bounty of, we can think of everything we're thinking simultaneously because it's all happening simultaneously, rather than think of it in the bits and pieces of the immediate stories of the getting better, rather than say, I've always been better. I'm just starting to notice that what I'm doing always seems to happen to me when I don't admit I'm actually causing it. It just becomes,
I know I'm causing it. I like it. I'm bringing those chemicals on. I'm participating in Christmas. Are you kidding? I'm completely aware.
okay. I know that.
I'm down with it. I would probably
I'm challenging the thinking to give you a little broader view. When I realized that the whole thing about responsibility, when you conceded that, you started realizing you're always responsible. It doesn't mean you can't do irresponsible things. Doesn't mean you can't think irresponsibly and act irresponsibly.
Don't
It
give
simply
me
means
don't give me permission to be irresponsible. I could run with that.
when you finally run with it, you'll start seeing what I'm saying, because you'll start seeing that it's always possible and you're always able, but you only
Choose.
end up being compelled addictively when you think you're not. When you think things that are true aren't true, like all possibility is possible, you're going to start thinking not doing those things means you're over them, when in fact you're defending against them, and you're not in a position of neutrality at all. You're in a position against what's happening, rather than saying, oh, I can go wrong in it. When you embrace being irresponsible, not being irresponsible, but acting irresponsibly and thinking irresponsibly, the ability to start seeing it will be clearer to you, immediate and resolved immediately, rather than thinking of it as something that's shameful and guilty and all that kind of stuff. It won't be as shameful because you'll stop it like that, rather than continue to start it and think you should feel better about it someday, somehow.
It'll have a lack of drama attached to it.
Well, you will if you're dramatizing it.
You're so sensible. Freaking sensible all the time. What the hell? Where's parade? Where's my parade?
I'm challenging only because this thing keeps looping. It's been going on so long in history. And here's a story, Anthony. I don't know that this is absolutely true, but I think it's close. It's been going on through history so long, we think it's normal. We think it's part of who we are. We think it's what we do, and that there is no other way. The fact is that's all maintained in a story that I would suggest is not true. So the only immediacy of knowing is knowing that what we know now, and anything we're doing now is the thing that's causing it. If we're witnessing it all, and think we need to get away from it, that's a new fight we're posing, rather than saying, oh, there must be something in me that I'm still thinking that isn't true. And that alone, my relationship to all that stuff I'm thinking that isn't true, all of a sudden becomes friendly. And I begin to embrace it, and I begin to have a friend in it rather than an enemy. And it begins to describe to me, I begin to witness literally, and I think it's actually talking to me, just like I thought it made me do these things. I start witnessing the information from it that's been missed, that I haven't been learning from because I have been denying I'm doing. And all of a sudden, the reflections are always perfect textbook descriptions of what we're doing wrong if we're struggling at all. It's all built into it. If I'm friendly with it and open to it, I will see that clearly, have that clearly, know that in my thinking awareness, and start functioning very, very differently than the dysfunctional capacity I create trying to deny and fight it. My time is up, kids.
Okay, thank you
for the day.
Do you like it better instead of story? We call it just the facts. Don't tell me a story. Just tell me the facts.
Well, the storytelling is an attempt to tell facts, but when they're not facts and they're sort of made up, they're basically fiction. So that's a very different thing. Think of the word fact, though. It has act in it, right? Facts, it's an action. So if we're actually talking about the facts, we would talk about things that don't change, because we could speak to them immediately and not have to tell great lengthy stories about a whole life to describe them. We just speak to them immediately. That would be the fact. And if we resolve the facts, all of a sudden the rest of the storytelling becomes a little more obvious because it's all based in an ever-changing story. Thoughts are constantly changing. They never stay the same unless they're dealing with something absolute. The only way to align...
Two last things, just because we're about to go. One is I had justifiable anger against somebody, but I didn't use it, which was great because it's just such a different. I could have been a total dick, and it wouldn't have gotten us anywhere. But
justifiable.
What?
No anger is justifiable.
There's justifiable anger.
No, zero loopholes. You're 100% responsible. There's not one iota, not even 10%, 5%, 1%. There's zero justifiable.
Well, and at the same time, within the insanity, Jana, all anger is justified in the insanity. Doesn't mean it's real, because if it's insane, it's a sick thought trying to justify itself to take an action that kills people. It's homicide or suicide is the end run of that thinking process.
Right.
And the last thing
we'll do more of that another time.
And then the last thing is, you have to run right now, you mean?
Yes.
Oh,
I love you, Jack. I love you, Anthony. I love all of you guys. Thank you for being my
Anthony,
friend.
if you need to get it off, do it.
No, it was just it was actually more funny. I was in France here, and then somebody was playing music loud, and I started getting upset because they were screwing my peace and quiet up, and I was really angry. And then I remembered that's the story that I always use for my example: is if your neighbors are playing music loud, how is that your responsibility? And I'm like, well, I get to if I liked his music or if I didn't hear, so that's my response. That's my part of it. And then I started listening to the music, and I'm like, you know what? I kind of like this music. It's not so bad.
I think it's funny that you think your tranquility is disrupted by their music. There's a stretch.
Yeah.
Love you guys.
Thanks, you guys. Good. Thanks for your honesty, Jana.
Thank you.
Yes, very much. All of
Thank
both.
you. Bye, Jack.
Everybody.